Jack Freeman sat in his office at the Pentagon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. Old science fiction books lined his shelves, worn paperbacks with cracked spines and faded covers. As a lieutenant colonel in United States Strategic Command, his unusual collection often raised eyebrows from visitors expecting military manuals instead. The year was 2047, and Earth had been at peace with the Centauri Alliance for almost 10 years. The brutal First Contact War had changed everything about how humans thought about warfare and defense. As the military's foremost expert on unconventional warfare strategy, Freeman had been given an important assignment: document how 20th and 21st century science fiction had shaped the military tactics that ultimately saved humanity. Freeman opened his tablet and began recording. Official Documentation Project, Day 1. Subject: The Fiction Integration Protocol and its architect, Dr. Samantha Powell. He paused, looking at the photo on his desk. It showed a middle-aged woman with short gray hair and intense eyes, standing in front of a whiteboard covered with diagrams. Few people remembered her now, but Freeman knew the truth. Without Powell, humanity might not have survived. Freeman began reading through classified files that had only recently been unsealed. The story began in the early 2020s, when Powell had been a military strategist with an unusual hobby. While her colleagues spent their free time playing golf or politics, Powell devoured science fiction novels, watched old space movies, and participated in online forums discussing alien invasion scenarios. In 2023, Powell wrote her first paper, connecting patterns in alien invasion literature to potential real-world defense strategies. Her colleagues laughed. Her supervisors warned her to focus on real threats. Only one general saw potential in her ideas: General Alan Ward, who had secretly enjoyed science fiction himself since childhood. People forget that before the Centauri arrived, the idea of alien contact was just fiction, Freeman recorded. Powell was creating defense strategies for a threat most military leaders considered impossible. With General Ward's limited support, Powell created a small, underfunded department called Strategic Fictional Analysis. The SFA began as just Powell and two junior analysts working in a converted storage room at the Pentagon basement. Their official mission was to explore unconventional threat scenarios, but their real work focused on how to defend Earth against technologically superior alien forces. Freeman flipped through digital scans of Powell's original notebooks. Her early work had focused on identifying common weaknesses in fictional alien invaders. Why did advanced civilizations capable of interstellar travel so often fail in their invasions of Earth? What patterns emerged across different stories? Could these patterns reveal actual strategic insights? Powell's first breakthrough came in 2029, Freeman noted. She convinced Air Force leadership to fund prototype development of adaptive combat armor based on concepts from 1950s pulp magazines. The armor used environmental sensors and flexible materials that could rapidly adjust to different combat conditions. 6 years later, that same technology saved thousands of lives during the Battle of Nebraska. Freeman found records of the meeting where Powell had pitched her idea. The military engineers had been skeptical until Powell showed them the science, fiction magazines describing similar concepts. The authors weren't engineers, she had told them, but they understood the tactical advantages such armor would provide. Fiction writers imagine needs before we recognize them as needs. As the afternoon turned to evening, Freeman discovered more examples of Powell's influence. In 2031, her team expanded to 15 people and moved to a proper office. They began running war games based on invasion scenarios from popular science fiction. Military leaders started paying attention when Powell's team consistently defeated conventional forces using unexpected tactics. Freeman smiled as he found a memo written by a frustrated general. Powell's people don't fight fair. They don't follow established military doctrine. They fight like they're in a damned movie. That had been exactly Powell's point. Any species capable of traveling across stars to reach Earth would likely have studied human military history and doctrine. They would expect certain responses and tactics, but would they understand human stories? Would they predict strategies based on Luke Skywalker's attack on the Death Star, or tactics inspired by Ender's Game? By 2033, the SFA had developed the Fiction Integration Protocol, a systematic method for extracting useful defensive concepts from science fiction and applying them to real-world military planning. The protocol identified technological innovations described in fiction that might be possible with current or near-future technology. It also cataloged tactical approaches that might confuse or surprise an advanced enemy. Freeman found Powell's original journal entries from this period. She had written, "Fiction's greatest value isn't prediction but preparation. It trains our minds to accept the truly different, to imagine the truly alien. Military training teaches soldiers what to expect. Fiction teaches us to expect the unexpected." Not everyone appreciated Powell's methods. Freeman found numerous complaints from traditional military leaders who considered her work a waste of resources. One colonel had written, "Powell is turning the United States military into a book club. Meanwhile, China and Russia are developing real weapons." Everything changed in 2037 when the first Centauri reconnaissance probe entered Earth orbit. Suddenly, Powell's scenarios weren't theoretical anymore. Freeman looked at the famous image captured by the International Space Station, the smooth silver object that had appeared without warning above Earth. Within hours of its arrival, Powell's team had identified 15 science fiction stories featuring similar first contact scenarios. They had presented military leadership with likely next steps based on these fictional patterns. Many had dismissed her analysis as panic. Then the probe began its systematic scan of Earth's defense systems, following almost exactly the pattern Powell had predicted based on fiction's information-gathering phase before invasion. Freeman closed his eyes, remembering the chaos of those days. He had been a young captain then, watching in disbelief as science fiction suddenly became reality. Powell had gone overnight from being considered an eccentric to humanity's best hope for understanding the alien presence. The fiction integration protocol saved us, Freeman recorded, not because science fiction writers had somehow predicted the specific details of the Centauri, but because they had prepared our imagination. They gave us the mental flexibility to face something truly alien. Freeman yawned and looked at the It was late, but he had barely scratched the surface of Powell's story. Tomorrow he would document how her work had transformed from theoretical to essential as Earth prepared for a war unlike any in human history. He shut down his tablet and stood up, looking once more at the photo of Powell. "You saw it coming," he said quietly to the image. "Not the specific threat, but the need to think beyond our limits." He turned off the light and left the office, walking past military personnel who had no idea they served in a fighting force shaped by stories once dismissed as mere entertainment. Captain Eric Daniels was not happy with his new assignment. As a decorated Marine officer with combat experience in 3 conflicts, being transferred to what many called the Sci-Fi Squad felt like a demotion. He stood outside the door to the Strategic Fictional Analysis Office, taking a deep breath before entering. By 2035, Dr. Samantha Powell's unconventional think tank had grown. What started as a tiny team in a Pentagon basement now occupied an entire floor. Dozens of analysts worked at stations covered with both military reports and science fiction novels. Some watched old movies on screens, taking careful notes. Others built complex simulations based on fictional alien encounters. "Captain Daniels?" A woman approached him, hand extended. "I'm Dr. Powell. Welcome to SFA." Daniels shook her hand stiffly. "Thank you, ma'am, though I'm still not clear on why I'm here." Powell smiled. "Because you're exactly the kind of officer we need. Someone who thinks the whole idea is ridiculous." She led him through the office, introducing him to the team. There were military analysts from every branch, but also literature professors, video game designers, and science fiction writers. It was unlike any military unit Daniels had ever seen. "Our job is simple but vital," Powell explained. "We identify concepts from fiction that might give us an edge if Earth ever faces a technologically superior enemy." Daniels couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "With all due respect, Dr. Powell, don't we have real threats to worry about?" "What makes you think an alien threat isn't real?" Powell asked, stopping at a large digital board displaying 15 distinct combat scenarios. Each of these represents a potential first contact situation with no historical precedent on Earth. Yet in each case, we have dozens of fictional accounts that might provide insight. Daniel studied the board. The scenarios ranged from orbital bombardment to biological subversion to cultural manipulation. Each had corresponding fiction references listed beside it. "This is the most controversial," Powell said, pointing to a scenario labeled Scattered Earth. "What's that?" Daniels asked, despite himself. "A doctrine we've developed for maintaining military effectiveness even if Earth's central command is destroyed or communication is severed. It's based on concepts from several novels where isolated human units had to fight without coordination. Over the next few weeks, Daniels was assigned to review the Scattered Earth doctrine. He expected to find it naive and impractical. Instead, he discovered a surprisingly robust system that addressed vulnerabilities in Earth's defense network he hadn't previously considered. "The problem with our current command structure," Powell explained during a briefing, "is that it assumes communication. What if an advanced enemy could simply cut off all our signals? In the Forever War, isolated human units had to fight for years without contact from Earth. We need that capability." Military leadership remained divided on Powell's approaches. General Frank Monroe, the Joint Chiefs Chairman, was particularly skeptical. "Dr. Powell," he said during a tense meeting Daniels attended, "we can't allocate resources based on science fiction. We need strategies grounded in reality." Powell remained calm. "General, every war in human history has been against other humans using technologies we understand. That won't be true in an interstellar conflict. Fiction is our only rehearsal for the truly unknown." Daniels found himself increasingly impressed by Powell's arguments, though he was careful not to show it. As a career military officer, he shared the general's concerns about diverting resources to prepare for what still seemed like a fantasy. Everything changed on June 14, 2037. Daniels was reviewing simulation results when alarms blared throughout the building. The staff gathered around screens showing live footage from orbital telescopes. A smooth silver object had appeared near Earth's moon. The Centauri reconnaissance probe had arrived. The next 24 hours were chaos. While most military units scrambled to respond without clear protocols, the SFA team moved with practiced precision. They had rehearsed this moment for years. "It's following pattern 3, Powell said calmly, watching the probe's movements. "Just like in The Silent. Stars go by. It's mapping our defenses before the main force arrives." Daniels watched in disbelief as the probe's behavior matched Powell's prediction exactly. It established orbit, then began systematic scans of Earth's defense installations. "How did you know?" he asked her quietly. "I didn't know it would be exactly like this," Powell replied. "But in fiction, advanced civilizations almost always scout before committing their main forces. It's logical." When the probe began actively scanning military installations, most commanders wanted to hide Earth's capabilities or showcase strength. Powell proposed a third option. "We should feed it specific misinformation," she said in an emergency meeting with military leadership. "Make it believe our defenses are concentrated in ways they aren't." General Monroe frowned. "Based on what tactical doctrine?" "Based on the puppet masters," Powell replied. "Where humans deliberately misled alien scouts about their technological capabilities." The room fell silent. For the first time, even the skeptics were listening to Powell without dismissing her references to fiction. Daniels found himself assigned to the team implementing Powell's plan. They coordinated with bases worldwide to create false defense patterns, making Earth's military seem both less advanced and differently distributed than it actually was. When the probe departed Earth orbit 2 weeks later, analysis confirmed it, had recorded the false information. Powell's team had successfully manipulated humanity's first contact with an alien intelligence. In the aftermath, Daniels sought out Powell in her office. She was already planning next steps, working with her team to predict when the main Centauri fleet might arrive. "I owe you an apology," Daniels said. "I thought this was all just fantasy." Powell looked up from her work. Fantasy and reality aren't as separate as we like to think, Captain. The human imagination has been preparing us for this moment for over a century. Daniels nodded slowly. What happens now? Now we prepare for their return, Powell said. The probe was just the beginning. Based on every first contact scenario we've studied, they'll be back, and not just to observe. As he left her office, Daniels realized how completely his perspective had changed. The sci-fi squad wasn't a joke anymore. It might be humanity's best hope for survival. He looked at the team of analysts and scientists working with renewed purpose. The probe had proven Powell right about one thing. Earth needed to think beyond conventional military doctrine. If aliens were real, perhaps the fictional strategies to defeat them deserved serious consideration too. In the months that followed, Captain Eric Daniels became one of the SFA's most dedicated officers. He helped transform Powell's theories into practical military applications as Earth prepared for what they now knew was coming: actual war with an advanced alien civilization. Lieutenant Kelly Martinez floated through the narrow corridor of the International Space Station, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. As Earth's official first contact specialist, she carried the weight of humanity on her shoulders. The massive Centauri warships had arrived 3 weeks ago, positioning themselves in orbit around Earth. Now, after days of signal exchanges, the aliens had agreed to meet with human representatives aboard the space station. Martinez had studied under Dr. Samantha Powell for 2 years before this assignment. While most diplomats focused on human international relations, Martinez had specialized in fictional alien communication patterns. Many had laughed at her career choice. No one was laughing now. "They're docking in 5 minutes," said Commander Paul Wilson through her earpiece. "Are you ready?" "As ready as anyone can be," Martinez replied, reaching the airlock where first contact would occur. She adjusted her uniform and took a deep breath. The diplomatic team around her looked nervous. They clutched traditional diplomatic gifts and prepared formal greetings. Martinez watched them with concern. Her training under Powell had taught her that traditional human diplomacy might be meaningless or even dangerous when dealing with truly alien minds. "Remember what we discussed," she told the team. "Don't assume anything. Their gestures, expressions, even concept of personal space might be completely different from ours." The airlock hissed as pressure equalized. Martinez recognized the sound from a dozen science fiction films she had studied. Life imitating art in the most crucial moment of human history. When the door opened, Martinez's training was immediately put to the test. The Centauri were roughly humanoid but with significant differences, taller than humans with gray-blue skin and 4 arms. They wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor that pulsed with subtle lights. Martinez stepped forward. Instead of offering a handshake or bow, she performed the greeting Powell had designed based on analysis of 15 different fictional first contact scenarios. A simple, open-palmed gesture followed by a display of her empty hands turning slowly. The yes. Lead Centauri tilted its head, eyes blinking in a pattern Martinez recognized from Powell's predictions. The pattern matched scenarios from multiple works of fiction. They were testing human responses against predictive models. "We welcome you to Earth's orbital station," Martinez said clearly. "We hope for peaceful communication between our peoples." The translation devices worked, but the meeting quickly grew tense. The Centauri asked pointed questions about Earth's defenses, population centers, and resource distribution. Martinez recognized these queries from Powell's invasion preparation dialogue list. Questions that appeared in multiple fictional first contact scenarios before hostilities began. Martinez carefully implemented Protocol Asimov, a communication strategy designed by Powell's team that revealed minimal true information while establishing humans as potentially valuable allies rather than easy conquests. The protocol was named after the famous author who wrote about robots programmed not to harm humans. Back on Earth, military leaders watched the exchange with growing concern. Traditional diplomatic approaches were failing. The Centauri seemed uninterested in cultural exchange or trade discussions. They focused entirely on Earth's capabilities and vulnerabilities. "They're sizing us up," General Monroe said during an emergency meeting at the Pentagon. "This isn't a diplomatic mission. It's reconnaissance." Dr. Powell, now the head of Earth's alien response team, nodded grimly. "Every fictional invasion scenario in our database begins this way. They're assessing if we're worth conquering and how difficult it would be." 3 days after first contact, the Centauri revealed their true intentions. Without warning, their fleet opened fire on Earth's orbital defense platforms. The first contact war had begun. Martinez was evacuated from the space station just minutes before it was destroyed. As her escape pod raced toward Earth, she watched humanity's first diplomatic effort with an alien species end in flames. Earth's conventional military forces scrambled to respond, but they were outmatched by Centauri technology. Traditional tactics proved useless against ships that could predict standard Earth military responses. In the chaos, Powell's team activated defense systems that had been quietly developed based on science fiction scenarios. While conventional military units suffered heavy losses in direct confrontations, forces using Powell's strategies managed surprising successes. Martinez was quickly reassigned to Powell's command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. There she joined a team implementing unconventional defense strategies drawn from decades of invasion literature. "Conventional warfare won't work," Powell explained during a strategy session. "The Centauri have studied our military history. They expect us to fight like humans have always fought each other. We need to fight like we've imagined fighting aliens." Martinez was put in charge of implementing the Wells maneuver, named after the author of The War of the Worlds. The complex strategy involved creating the illusion that Centauri forces had breached Earth's inner defenses. In fiction, aliens often rush to exploit perceived weaknesses, Martinez explained to skeptical military officers. "We can use that expectation against them." Over the next week, Earth forces deliberately abandoned key defensive positions, making it appear that humanity's resistance was crumbling. The Centauri pressed their advantage, pushing their forces into what they believed was a collapsing defense network. In reality, Powell's team had prepared a massive trap. Drawing on concepts from dozens of fictional last stands against alien invaders, they had transformed apparent weakness into strategic advantage. The turning point came when a Centauri battle group pursued retreating Earth forces into the Atlantic Ocean. Expecting to destroy a critical undersea command center, they instead encountered a network of previously hidden weapons platforms designed specifically to counter their technology. Martinez watched from the command center as the trap closed. The Centauri ships, so confident in their technological superiority, found themselves surrounded and cut off from their main fleet. "It's working," she whispered as the battle unfolded on the monitors around her. For the first time since the war began, human forces had achieved a significant victory. Powell stood beside her, watching calmly as her fictional strategies translated into real-world success. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Wells maneuver is only one of many strategies we've developed." As news of the victory spread, military leaders who had once dismissed Powell's methods now desperately sought her advice. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven it could fight back effectively. Martinez looked at the battle maps with newfound hope. "They expected us to fight conventionally and lose," she said. "They didn't expect us to have been preparing for them, for centuries, in our stories." Powell nodded. "That's our advantage. Humans have been imagining this war since before we had electricity. We've rehearsed it in our minds 1,000 different ways. The Centauri may have better technology, but we have better imagination." By 2040, the war with the Centauri had reached a stalemate. Humanity had suffered terrible losses, but Dr. Powell's science fiction strategies had prevented total defeat. Earth forces had abandoned conventional tactics entirely, instead relying on approaches the aliens couldn't predict. Sergeant Ben Cooper stood at attention as General Monroe addressed the gathered soldiers. Cooper was an unusual recruit for this elite new unit. Before the war, he had been both a Marine and a college professor who taught courses on science fiction literature. Now that unusual combination made him perfect for what the military was calling the Fiction Brigade. "Each of you has been selected for your unique background. General Monroe said to the 40 soldiers in the room. Some of you are combat veterans. Others are experts in literature, film, or game design. Together you will form our most experimental fighting force. Cooper looked around at his new teammates. They were an odd mix. Battle-hardened soldiers standing alongside people who looked more like academics than warriors. Yet they all shared one quality, the ability to think beyond traditional military doctrine. After the general left, Dr. Powell herself entered the room. Though now 60 years old, she moved with energy and purpose. The early victories using her methods had made her the most respected strategist in Earth's defense. The Fiction Brigade has one mission, Powell told them. Develop and implement combat tactics the Centauri cannot predict, because they're based on human narrative traditions, rather than logical military doctrine. Their training was unlike anything Cooper had experienced in his military career. Instead of practicing standard combat maneuvers, they studied story structures. Rather than focusing on weapons efficiency, they discussed plot twists and character motivations. The Centauri think like chess players, Powell explained during one session. They calculate probabilities based on known patterns. But humans tell stories. We create meaning through narrative. That's our advantage. Cooper helped translate Powell's theoretical frameworks into practical field operations. His background in both literature and combat made him uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between story and strategy. Their first mission came 3 months later. A critical communications array in the Arizona desert was under threat from Centauri ground forces. Conventional defenses had failed to protect similar installations elsewhere. The Fiction Brigade was deployed as a last resort. Cooper led a team of 10 soldiers to the facility. On paper, their mission seemed impossible. They were outnumbered 5-1 by Centauri warriors with superior weapons and armor. We're not going to defend this position conventionally, Cooper told his team as they surveyed the facility. We're going to use the Dune strategy. The strategy was named after a classic science fiction novel where humans used the harsh desert environment against technologically superior enemies. Cooper's team studied the desert terrain, identifying natural features they could use to their advantage. When the Centauri attacked at dawn, they expected to find human forces barricaded inside the facility, following standard defensive protocols. Instead, Cooper's team had hidden themselves in the surrounding desert, using camouflage techniques inspired by the novel. The aliens moved confidently toward what appeared to be an abandoned installation. They fell into carefully prepared traps that used the desert itself as a weapon. Quicksand pits, areas where the morning sun created blinding reflections, and narrow passes where their superior numbers became a disadvantage. Cooper watched from his hiding spot as the alien forces became disoriented and separated. The Fiction Brigade soldiers struck in small teams, following attack patterns based on the sandworm ambush from the novel. They appeared suddenly from the sand, attacked, then disappeared again before the Centauri could respond effectively. By midday, the alien force had retreated in confusion, leaving the communications array intact. The Fiction Brigade had achieved their first victory without losing a single soldier. News of their success spread quickly through Earth's military leadership. The Fiction Brigade was soon given more missions, each more challenging than the last. They developed a reputation for achieving the impossible. Cooper became the brigade's chief tactician, developing a methodology he called narrative warfare. Instead of approaching combat as a series of logical moves and counter-moves, he framed it as a story with protagonists, antagonists, and plot developments. The key is to make the Centauri play the role we want them to play in our story, Cooper explained to his team. If we set up the narrative correctly, they'll follow it to the conclusion we want. In the months that followed, the Fiction Brigade implemented tactics inspired by everything from Ender's Game to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Each time, the Centauri were unable to predict their approaches because they fell outside any recognizable military doctrine. The brigade's most famous victory came when Cooper's unit was assigned to defend a critical mountain base in Colorado. The facility housed research on reverse-engineered Centauri technology that could potentially turn the tide of the war. Intelligence indicated that the Centauri were sending a massive force to destroy it. Conventional military leaders wanted to match force with force, bringing in heavy artillery and air support. Cooper proposed a different approach. "We'll use the Bradbury Gambit," he told his superiors, referring to a strategy inspired by Ray Bradbury's Martian stories. The plan seemed like madness. They would appear to abandon the base entirely. Military leadership reluctantly approved the plan, having learned to trust the fiction brigade's unconventional methods. Cooper's team worked day and night to transform the mountain facility and surrounding terrain into an elaborate illusion. When the Centauri force arrived, they found what appeared to be a hastily evacuated base. Everything of value seemed to have been removed, suggesting the humans had retreated with their important research. The aliens entered the facility cautiously. As they spread through the complex, subtle psychological warfare elements activated. The fiction brigade had studied Centauri psychology from previous encounters and identified specific fears and aversions in their species. The base's lighting systems created disorienting patterns that matched frequencies the Centauri found disturbing. Sound systems generated tones at the edge of their hearing range. Environmental controls created temperature and humidity conditions particularly uncomfortable for their biology. These weren't deadly weapons, but they didn't need to be. The Bradbury Gambit wasn't about killing the enemy. It was about making them retreat of their own accord. Cooper watched from a hidden command center as confusion spread through the alien forces. The Centauri commanders ordered a thorough search for hidden human technology, but their soldiers became increasingly disoriented and anxious in the psychologically manipulated environment. After 18 hours, the Centauri force withdrew without destroying the facility. They reported to their fleet that the base had been abandoned and stripped of valuable technology. In reality, all the research remained safely hidden behind false walls and secret rooms. As the fiction brigade celebrated another victory, Cooper reflected on how completely warfare had changed. They weren't winning through superior firepower or technology. They were winning through stories, creating narratives that the logical, predictable Centauri couldn't understand or counter. "This is how we'll survive," Cooper told his team as they watched the alien ships depart. "Not by fighting better than they do, but by fighting differently than they can imagine." Lieutenant Colonel Jack Freeman sat in his Pentagon office in 2047, reviewing the final notes for his historical analysis. After months of research, he had documented how science fiction had shaped the military strategies that saved humanity during the Centauri War. Now he needed to understand how those same fictional concepts had helped create peace. The war had ended in 2042 with neither side achieving total victory. Earth forces had suffered terrible losses, but had made conquests so costly that the Centauri eventually sought negotiations. The resulting peace remained fragile even 5 years later, but it had held. Freeman had scheduled his most important interview for last. Dr. Samantha Powell, now retired at age 74, had agreed to meet him at her home in Virginia. As the architect of the Fiction Integration Protocol and the visionary who had prepared Earth for alien contact, her insights were essential to complete his report. Powell's home was modest, but filled with books. Science fiction novels filled entire walls, many signed by their authors. Movie posters from classic space films hung in frames. It was the home of someone who had spent a lifetime exploring fictional worlds, only to find them becoming reality. "Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Powell," Freeman said as they sat in her study. Powell smiled. "Please call me Sam. We're beyond formalities at this point." Freeman activated his recorder. "I've documented how your science fiction strategies helped Earth survive the war, but I'm still trying to understand how we achieved peace." Powell picked up an old book from her desk. "The same way we survived, through stories. Our greatest insight wasn't about weapons or tactics. It was about understanding the alien mind through fiction." She explained how, during the final years of the war, her team had identified patterns in Centauri behavior that paralleled specific alien civilizations from human fiction. These insights had allowed Earth negotiators to craft a peace proposal aligned with Centauri values. "Most people think we won the war through clever battle tactics," Powell said. "But our most important victory came at the peace table. We needed to understand not just how Centauri fight but how they think. Freeman listened as Powell described the turning point. After years of studying Centauri language and behavior, her team had recognized similarities to an alien civilization portrayed in a science fiction novel from the 2010s. That fictional species valued what humans would call honor above practical considerations like territory or resources. Once we understood that, we completely changed our approach, Powell explained. Instead of offering traditional peace terms focused on boundaries and resources, we framed the agreement around concepts of mutual respect and honorable conduct, the T. Centauri had responded positively to this approach, leading to the historic peace treaty signed on July 12, 2042. What most military historians failed to recognize was how directly that treaty had been influenced by fictional first contact scenarios. Science fiction's greatest value wasn't in predicting specific technologies, Powell said, echoing words Freeman had read in her early journals. It was in preparing human imagination for the truly alien. It gave us the mental flexibility to understand beings who think fundamentally differently than we do. Freeman noted how Powell's team had identified key aspects of Centauri psychology that matched fictional portrayals, their concept of time, their approach to negotiation, even their manner of expressing agreement or disagreement. The human negotiators, who didn't study fiction, kept misinterpreting Centauri responses, Powell said. But those of us who had spent decades imagining alien mindsets could see past our human assumptions. As their conversation continued, Freeman realized that Powell's greatest contribution hadn't been the battle tactics that made her famous. It had been her insight that human stories about aliens might contain essential truths about how to communicate with actual non-human intelligence. The peace has held for 5 years now, Freeman observed. Do you think it will last? Powell looked thoughtful. It will if we remember what brought us to it. Peace didn't come from our weapons or even our courage. It came from understanding. And that understanding came from generations of humans imagining what it would be like to meet beings from another world. The next morning, Freeman presented his completed findings to the newly established Interspecies Defense Council. Military leaders and civilian officials from 20 nations gathered to hear his report on how science fiction had shaped humanity's response to first contact. Dr. Powell's fiction integration protocol wasn't just about battlefield tactics, Freeman told them. It represented a fundamental shift in how humans prepared for the unknown. He displayed evidence showing how specific works of fiction had influenced key military and diplomatic decisions throughout the conflict. From first contact protocols to battlefield strategies to peace negotiations, humanity's century-long tradition of imagining alien encounters had provided crucial advantages. Our greatest weapon against the Centauri wasn't technological superiority, Freeman concluded. It was narrative flexibility, the ability to imagine countless scenarios through fiction and adapt accordingly. The council members listened with growing interest as Freeman explained how this insight was now being applied to education and training. At the newly established Powell Institute for Strategic Imagination, science fiction studies had become a core component of military and diplomatic education. After the presentation, Freeman walked through the Institute's main training facility. A new class of officers was analyzing classic novels alongside actual combat footage from the war. In another room, diplomatic cadets studied fictional first contact scenarios, looking for insights that might improve communication with the Centauri. Freeman paused at a wall display showing Dr. Powell's famous quote that now appeared in military academies worldwide. Those who cannot imagine the future are doomed to be surprised by it. As he watched young officers and diplomats studying both military history and science fiction with equal seriousness, Freeman felt profound gratitude for Powell's vision. The world had changed forever, but humanity had survived thanks to its storytellers. That evening, Freeman completed his final report with a personal observation. The Centauri War proved that fiction isn't merely entertainment or escape. Stories are how humans rehearse possible futures. For centuries, we practiced first contact through our imagination. When that contact finally came, those imaginary rehearsals saved us. He closed his tablet and looked out at the night sky. Somewhere, up there, Centauri ships maintained their uneasy peace with Earth. and somewhere beyond them, other alien civilizations might be preparing their own first contacts. Freeman smiled slightly. Whatever came next, humans would be ready. Not because they had the strongest weapons, but because they had the strongest imaginations. They had been preparing for the unknown through stories since they first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back.